what should I do to make sure that I'm both happy, more productive and healthier?
I would, again, not start your day with something that is inherently a multitask. So if you cannot start with email, I would not start with it, because I view that, at least for me, as something that will start the day with multitasking and will always feel unfinished, like never feel like it's finished. Block out times where you designate on your calendar that this is the only thing that you're doing, and leave some buffer for it, because there's something called the planning fallacy. We always overestimate how much we can get done in a given amount of time. So I'd say fewer things on your to-do list, fewer things. And on the top, maybe even just one thing that's, if I get this done, this was a good productive day. Focus on that thing, pay yourself first, do the important thing first, and really try to have some, when you're trying to be focused. It's important to mingle with people and exchange ideas when that's what you want to do. But when you really have to be focused, to try to be in a place that's as distraction-free as possible. And unfortunately, that includes even, turning down or off music, even though it's pleasant and can help your affect and can motivate, but it also does have an impairment on cognitive function because you are paying attention to it to some degree.
So don't listen to music while I'm doing my work.
I mean, that's hard to say, because I do it sometimes too, because it can have an energizing effect or it can have a calming effect, and those are good, but it does take up brain space. So you have to balance those.
How do they know it takes up brain space?
You can see how people perform on tasks when the music is on and when the music is off. And it's not as big a deal if the music is very familiar, where you're kind of like, it's not novel, so you're not attending to it the same way. But, when I'm trying to be super focused now, I'll turn the music off. But if I feel my sort of motivation waning, then maybe I'll tune it back on. But I want to use it deliberately instead of just having it in the background all the time, because it takes up a little space. If it's real noise, like decibels is a logarithmic scale, so small differences are actually a big deal. But if you go from, I think it's like maybe 70 to 80 decibels, that's like the difference of going from a washing machine to a vacuum cleaner, thereabouts, in your background noise. That has a enormous influence on your cognitive ability and your productivity, like a 15% decrement in your
just because of sound.
Yeah,
volume, sorry.
Because you attend to it. That's how our brain, focus is a challenge, because this is not the situation that we evolved in, right? We evolved in a situation where paying attention to novel stimuli is a really good thing. And sometimes it's still a very good thing. But it's at odds with a lot of these modern things that we're trying to do that are pretty new tasks for people.
What about instrumental music? Because I tend to find that if I'm listening to music that has lyrics in it, then I find it quite distracting when I'm trying to do some work, specifically writing work or reading work. So when I'm researching guests for the podcast, like I was today in my hotel room, I had a song playing. It was a rap song, and I could feel my brain subtly jumping from the screen that I was reading to the rap lyrics, to the screen, to the rap lyrics, almost like just oscillating between the two.
Yeah.
And I thought, you got to turn that off because you're not reading. I turned it off and I really made progress. But I sometimes, when I write like books and stuff like that, I put instrumentals on. And there's actually some apps in the App Store now that are called like focus music, and they're lyric-free music.
And maybe like not lots of tonal changes or not very complex
Very
melodies,
simple,
maybe.
repeating.
I mean, I think that's going to be better, right? The less novelty there is for you to attend to, that's better. But I think it's also worth trying it with nothing. And it depends how much you're pushing yourself, right? Like an improvement of motivation or your affect or feeling good might be worth it if you're not all the way at the edge pushing yourself, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever been on there was a time where I was trying to, do some foreign language lessons that I was listening to while I would be running. And if I started hitting it hard while I was running, I couldn't even remember what was said, because you switch into being really focused, right? And so I think it depends. If you're pushing yourself all the way, you need everything. Like there are times when I'm writing where I'm trying to balance a lot of ideas in my head, and I almost feel like I'm overheating a little bit.
Yeah.
And if I'm in that phase, I want every advantage I can have. So I push the distractions out. But like, there's also times to be pleasant. I think part of what's sensible is working in intervals, planning to work in intervals. Focus hard for a little while, do the Maya Angelou, then switch to your little mind, where we're doing something that's sort of more fun and refreshing, and maybe lets you incubate for a few minutes also. Take a shower, take a walk,
What about notifications? Because, I have a lot of notifications. I try and turn them all off, but they're still there in the background. And you was talking before we got going about this sort of internal barometer of distraction that we all have.
Yeah. This is another aspect of Dr. Mark's work, where she found that we have this kind of internal mechanism where if you're getting distracted all the time by notifications or whatever it is and switching a lot, if you say, well, now I really have to hunker down, I'm going to get rid of the notifications or whatever this stuff is, you will start self-interrupting to maintain the cadence of interruptions to which you have become accustomed, right? As if we have some internal like distractometer that is saying, this is your normal cadence of interruption. I'm going to continue it by popping into your brain. Oh, here's this thing I need to check. Oh, here's this person I didn't respond to. You know, you'll self-interrupt. That will go away, but not immediately. So if you want to have a lower cadence of interruption, you need to like build by getting rid of those external interruptions, know that you're going to be self-interrupting for a while, and that'll go down more slowly. So it has to be more habit formation instead of just, today I shall be, you know, uninterruptible.
Okay, so just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So say that I get a notification I get 10 notifications a minute, and that's what I'm used to, right? And then I decide to turn my notifications off. Because I'm used to 10 notifications per minute, you're saying that I will basically think of 10 things per minute to interrupt myself with for a while, because that's what I'm used to. So we get comfortable with a certain level of interruption at a certain cadence. And even if we remove the thing that's interrupting us, we'll just replace it with something else that interrupts us that amount at that cadence.
Yeah, so you can see in studies where people are taking cognitive tests, if they have their phone visible, even if it's off, the people who are more phone dependent or sort of more used to interruptions, they'll have a bigger impairment on the test if the phone is even like visible or around them, because they'll, and so it's, you know, what thing did I forget to do? And I think something that can help with this is keep a pad nearby, and when that thing pops into your head of what you forgot to do or who you forgot to respond to, write it down. So at least it's, maybe that helps it not stick in your mind where you're trying to hold it in working memory, like cognitively outsource it. So at least it's not sitting in there. And I think that can help the adjustment.
It makes me think a lot about people that struggle with sleep and just sleep hygiene generally, because if our phone is this thing of interruption throughout the day, then we go to bed cuddling our phone, which a lot of people do. It's probably going to have quite a big impact on our ability to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if, I think I think our phones are really useful for certain things, and I think they are disruptive for other things. And I wonder if sleep is one of the most important, because you don't really want to be like leaving residue on your brain when you're trying to go to sleep. So I would put the phone as far away as possible when you're really trying to sleep, and not at the last minute either, personally.
What do you do?
Oh, I leave it in a different floor and airplane mode.
Have you always done that?
No.
When did you start doing that?
Well, I definitely do it when I'm in the process of writing a book, because then all these things that I take for granted, I'm like, now I really got to lock in and be better. And I have a 5-year-old son, and I was more of a night person who would work at night. Like I would do a lot of my writing in the wee hours, and he's getting up early no matter what. And so I realized that I had to start being a lot more efficient about some of my schedule, and started thinking a lot more about having it be dark, having it be quiet, having it be cool, not having the phone around. The last thing I'm reading not being work-related, otherwise I'll be thinking about that and it'll take me longer to go to sleep. So I think I became a lot better about it when my son came around.
It's funny you mentioned that you've got a son, because much of your work made me think about what I'll do when I'm a parent someday. Because you talk about how these early years, where if a child focuses on being a specialist in something particular or a generalist, they have wildly different outcomes. And I think as a big football fan and a big Manchester United fan, I've always thought, when my kid comes out of my wife someday, the first thing I'm going to get him doing from the age of 2 months old is kicking a football around. Because then he'll be a Manchester United player. I'll get to go to the games. I'll be in the players' box. Everything will be great. But your work seems to suggest that if I want him to become a Manchester star, maybe I shouldn't do that.
I'm not convinced that you are going to be like a vicarious living kind of dad. Maybe you'll turn out to be, but I'm not convinced. But let me tell you, you just reminded me of an interesting story where I was once giving a talk about some of this research in sports that shows that the people who go on to the highest levels, again, there are a ton of different paths, but they tend to follow the Roger path, not the Tiger path. So Tiger Woods, we know, are very early specialization famously. Roger Federer played a whole bunch of different sports, didn't specialize until later than some of his peers.
So Tiger was playing golf since he was...
His father gave him a putter when he was 10 months old. When he was 2, just as a toy. He wasn't trying to teach him to be a golfer. He gave him a toy. As Tiger himself said, my father never once asked me to play. It was always me asking him to let me play. But that's ignored. But at At 2, he was on national television. You can go on YouTube, see him on national TV showing off his swing. And then by 3, he's saying, I'm going to be the world's next great golfer. He's world famous as a teenager. By the age of 21, he's the greatest golfer in the world, right? On the other hand, Roger played a variety of different sports. Basketball, rugby, skateboarding, soccer. Mother was a tennis coach but declined to coach him because he wouldn't return balls normally. I guess didn't like deliberate practice. Kept doing, let's see, he did handball, he did some rugby, skiing, swimming, wrestling. When his coaches wanted to move him up to play with older boys, he declined because he just wanted to talk about pro wrestling with his friends after practice. And he was not focused on being the next great from an early age like Tiger was. In fact, when he became good enough to warrant an interview with his local newspaper, the reporter asked him what he'd buy with his first hypothetical paycheck if he ever became a pro. And he said a Mercedes. His mom was aghast, right? She thought this was like gauche and so she asks the reporter to hear the interview recording. Turns out he just said mehr CDs in Swiss German. He just wanted more CDs, not a Mercedes, right? And she was fine with that. So he went on to be every bit as famous as Tiger Woods. But even tennis enthusiasts don't usually know anything about his developmental story, even though it's the norm according to the science. We only tell the Tiger stories, even though that one's the exception, right? And this is, why do we only tell the Tiger story? This is part of the debate I've had with Malcolm Gladwell when we're running together. And he said, he told me, it's a human cat video. You go on YouTube and see him at 2 years old and you got to share it. And I think that's true. But I think it's also because it feels like this tidy narrative that we can extrapolate to anything we want to be good at in our own lives. The problem is, as we talked about, golf is almost a uniquely horrible model of almost everything else that humans want to learn. It's like the epitome of a kind learning environment where the situation isn't changing, you're not having to react. So I think it's a bad model. And we underplay, even for famous people, the normal developmental trajectory. Like, I once gave a talk to a small group of people about some of this research in sports, showing that the typical path to becoming elite is with a sampling period. You learn a broad range of skills, learn about your own interests and abilities, delay specializing until later than peers. And Serena Williams sat in the second row. And I'm freaking out because you can present all the data you want, but if the GOAT stands up and says you're an idiot, it's going to be a bad day, right? And I'm like, please don't let her ask a question. Of course, she raises her hand for the first thing, and she goes, I think my father was ahead of his time. He had me do ballet, track and field, gymnastics, taekwondo, learn to throw a football for the overhand snapping motion of a serve. When there was too much travel on like a youth tour, he took me off so I could focus on school. I'd been a senior writer at Sports Illustrated and I had never heard that. Like, I assumed that she was this kind of quintessential Tiger story. So I think even those stories, when you look more deeply, they're not as clear cut as we tend to think.
Well, I learned this myself when I didn't know this as the rule, but I found the story of Lomachenko. Because my friend of mine brought me ringside to a fight in New York City, and I sat at the side of the ring watching this guy called Vasily Lomachenko that I'd never seen in my life. And I just couldn't believe his footwork. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And then after the fight, he won the fight, of course. After the fight, I looked into his win record, and it was something like he'd won 300 of his amateur fights and only ever lost one. And then he'd gone back and beat the guy that he had lost against. And in my mind, I'd never seen a boxer like it ever. And then when I read into your work, you've mentioned him as well as being one of these examples that had a really varied early upbringing, didn't just focus on boxing. And that's ultimately what made his skill stack so unusual and therefore probably what made him the best.
His story surprised even me, where he took several years off to learn dance. I wouldn't usually expect someone to take years off. It's just sort of do things in those same years. So that was amazing. But
his father's called Anatoly, and I think it was his father that took him off into dance classes or something, and then let him go back to boxing.
So for your prospective child, I wouldn't say like don't expose them to soccer. I think a lot of this is, I think there's a few things going. There are 3 buckets of things going on with why this delayed specialization works in sports. One is match quality. Again, the degree of fit between who you are and what you do.
Is that about passion, like what you're passionate about?
Ability and interests, both.
Okay.
And the earlier you force selection, the more likely you put the wrong person in the wrong spot. So especially when selection is way pre-puberty, you're probably putting people in the wrong spot.
My kid might want to be a boxer, but I'm forcing him to be a soccer player. and he might miss his potential with boxing.
Premature optimization, yeah.
Okay.
And that's also why we often see on junior teams the relative age effect, where kids born earlier in their birth cohort are way overrepresented on junior and youth national teams, because when they're 8 or whatever and selected, if they're 8 and 10 months versus just turned 8, that's a huge difference of development in that age. And coaches mistake that biological maturation for talent. And so youth teams are overloaded with kids born early in their youth cohort. And also in school, especially boys, if they're younger in their age cohort, are much more likely to get diagnosed with ADHD, but they're just acting like the younger boys that they are.
Okay.
And then that disappears at the top level. So it's not a good thing. So there's the relative age effect, that's one, or premature, choosing. There's injury, which is we now see a lot of adult style overuse injuries in kids, and the main predictor of that is 9 months a year of one sport and one sport only. So this isn't about less sports. There seems to be a protective effect of diversifying that is separate from just doing less, but actually, balancing yourself out in some way. But then there's a skill learning advantage where it's similar to language, where, kids who grow up with multiple languages, they will often show a little delay in some of their language skills, but that delay is totally wiped out in the long run. And they have an advantage for subsequently learning other languages. It looks very similar in a lot of these skills where if you're diversifying, there may be some delay, but you have an advantage for picking up other skills later on. And I don't think this is about whether you're putting on a basketball jersey or a football jersey. I think it's about variability in your problem solving, which is why I think so many of the great footballers grew up on futsal, where...
What's futsal?
It's futsal's with a small ball, soccer-like game with a small ball. I think the Brazilian name is like futebol de salão, which it means like football in a room. Small ball stays on the ground, played in a small space. And kids will be playing on, cobblestones one day and concrete the next day. And it's like in a phone booth, at hyperspeed. And so there's no one's drifting down the field. And everyone's having to judge, even if you don't have the ball, pick up on body movements to try to anticipate what's coming next. And the touches are about 6 times as frequent as in full-scale football. And so I think it engenders a lot more of this sort of variability than does just sort of the full-scale game.
It makes your reactions a lot faster as well. You have to make decisions faster with the ball because
be cool
you don't
under
have enough
pressure.
space. Yeah. It's funny when you were talking about the tiger example and why people broadcast that story more than they broadcast what you consider to be the average, which is just people having this varied upbringing and then eventually finding one thing and taking it forward. It made me think that, from my experience, people broadcast that, they basically broadcast anything that's the exception because it's the exception. So the story of, Tiger Woods is one example, but on the other side, with someone like Anthony Joshua, who started boxing at, I'm going to butcher this, but let's say 24, I hear that all the time because it's so unusual that he would become world champion, but start at 24. And the other story that you hear all the time is like the child prodigy story of like, I don't know, Michael Jackson or a Tiger Woods that started when they were 2. You don't hear about the person that starts at like 15.
Right.
Because it's not interesting.
Right.
Because it's the norm.
Right. Or who ramps up in sort of a normal way.
If
they started, because early exposure is great.
Yeah.
Early exposure is good. But yeah, and it's a little more equivocal, right? It's less of a prescription also. Like, so when someone starts late, we think they defied the odds. This is amazing. And when someone starts early, that's a very easy example to emulate. And so I think a lot of it is about that ease.
We referenced the word match quality, but also we talked about passion a little bit, which kind of is one factor of match quality. A lot of people are trying to figure out what they should be aiming at in their life. And one of the most popular questions I get from young people is, how do I find my passion? How do I know what it is? Or at least, like, what's the process to finding it? And they refer to it as if it's this sort of Easter egg and there's one of them and they have to go find it.
There's not one.
And it's singular because passion is a singular word.
Yeah. No, I don't. First of all, I think losing the idea that it is, that's like the idea that there's like a single soulmate out there for you, And obviously I found my single soulmate, but for most of the rest of you, there's a lot of things you might be interested in. In fact, the more things you try, you'll probably figure out the more things that you're interested in. I was just last week spending a little time. I was at the Pentagon spending some time with a lieutenant general who helped with a program they call talent-based branching there, where they were losing a lot of the people they identified as the highest potential were leaving the Army. And they started this pilot program called talent-based branching, where instead of saying, here's your path, here's your career path up or out, they'd pair them with sort of a coach-like figure, and they'd have them dabble in like 5 different career paths a little bit, reflect on it with their coach, take some tests. How did this fit you? They have to keep track of the reflections in an online portal. Again, self-regulatory learning, got to do it explicitly. And in that process, 90% of the Army cadets who went through that process changed their career preference. 90%. And this is just from a little bit of dabbling, because you don't know what's out there. You don't know what the opportunities are. And that, it helped retention, so people were more likely to stay if they find better fit. This is, I think, actually one of the really important things about, and I'll circle back to passion a little bit there, but when we think about grit, right, which everyone thinks of as, I think about this, and the reason that the Army made me think about it, my semantic network, is that the most famous grit research was done at West Point at the United States Military Academy by Angela Duckworth and her colleagues. And it found that the grit survey is a 12-question survey. Half the points are awarded for consistency of interests, not changing what you're interested in, and half the points for persistence of effort or perseverance. It turns out to be a good predictor of who would get through this very rigorous orientation at West Point called BEAST. Also has some predictive value for who would graduate.
So just to give you some context for the listeners there, from the way that I understood this, is that Angela Duckworth did this study to basically figure out what it was that made people more likely to get through this very rigorous selection process at an army barracks or something. Mm-hmm. And she determined that this grit, as she called it, was the thing that allowed people to be successful. So from that study, I've heard this all over the place.
Yeah.
That actually what makes people successful, even in my team, is grit.
Yeah, yeah. And that survey turned out to be a better predictor than were some traditional metrics of who would get through BEAST, like test scores and stuff like that. It also had some value for who would get through the military academy, as did some of those traditional metrics. But tons of those, like since about the mid-1990s, those very gritty cadets at West Point almost half of them have been quitting almost on the day that they are allowed. They have a 5-year active duty service commitment after they graduate, and almost half of them have been quitting. And so the Army at a certain point said, oh, we've got a millennial grit problem. Like too much avocado toast, not enough mortgages, or like whatever. And then some scientists who were also officers decided to study the problem, and they said, we haven't gotten a grit problem overnight. We've got a match quality problem, right? When the Army looked like the rest of the economy, where it was more up or out, and you faced the same kind of problems year over year, and you could have a period of training followed by a period of working, doing similar things, lateral mobility was limited. That was fine. It just mimicked the rest of the economy. Then you move into this, whatever you want to call it, knowledge, creativity, information economy. And people who can engage in creative problem solving and knowledge creation have tremendous lateral mobility.
They have lots of opportunities.
These young people are learning things about themselves in their early 20s, and they have no agency over career switching to match it, so they were just quitting. Right? When the Army first didn't realize this, so they threw retention bonuses at people. And the ones who were going to stay took it. Ones who were going to leave left anyway. $500 million. Taxpayer money didn't fix the problem. But what I think it shows is that how limited your insight into what you might want to do is based on the things that you've tried. Again, Herminia Ibarra's, we learn who we are in practice, not in theory. And so I think the biggest problem for young people is if they're sitting around introspecting to try to figure out what their passion is. Go and try something. It's almost certainly not going to be the first thing. It may be. You may get lucky. But it's probably not going to be the first thing. So you should get going on that experiment process and start building a model of the world so that you can understand what your options are. And I also think the issue with passion and happiness is, again, like I was talking about, I think it was before, I can't remember everything that was before the recording started and after. But like when I used to run the 800 meters or now when I write books, if you ask me at any given moment, am I enjoying this? Am I happy about it? Am I passionate about it? Sometimes like, no, I want to throw my computer out the window. Are you crazy? But it's so engaging. It's so compelling, and it pushes me in a way to learn that I can't do just on my free time. And so I don't think we have to think about just passion. Find something that is so incredibly engaging to you, and then go from there.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.